Namaskara, good morning, and thank you for joining us. I actually can't see anybody. Can we also have some of the lights for the audience members? Thank you so much. Yes. Hi, my name is Vinod Chandramouli. I will be your moderator for today's event. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Saturday morning. We're really hoping that you're able to take some takeaways back from this event. Um, I was chatting with a few of you right before this event, and one of the obvious answers for what made you come here was Pranay and Aruna. But another one was also curiosity. A lot of you came here because you were curious to know what this topic is all about, what this event is all about. I think curiosity is also a great word to describe what got Abhishek, Nishant, and I to build Mycelium ecology. Um, as humans collectively cross the 8 billion milestone, many fear that we are starting to see an increase in the human wildlife conflict emerging from successful conservation methods, in many cases unsuccessful as well, which also leads to abundance of protected wildlife. And often we don't know what to do when we have to ask the question, could we really coexist? When the three of us met to ideate around this, we realized that although each of us came with our own yardstick for success, our goals perfectly aligned. We wanted to build a community that observes, interprets, and nurtures the world we live in. We wanted to design a playbook that contributes to the idea of conservation through coexistence. And we also wanted to create a medium for next generation to appreciate and value nature around them. At Mycelium Ecology, we are investing in our children's future by owning and conserving rapidly depleting biodiverse habitats across Western Ghats. Our approach is to create knowledge, conversations, spaces, and installations for the future generation to reflect. Understanding our backyard is our first step into gathering this community and is aimed at creating dialogues that simplify our relationship with nature. The same sense of curiosity which got us mycelium ecology, which got all of you here, also made us reach out to our panel members today. And they wholeheartedly welcomed us into their community. So we are very thankful and grateful for that. When I spoke to Aruna for the first time, I quickly realized the steep learning curve I had in front of me. Aruna, who is an alumnus of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, has more than 30 years of varied entrepreneurial and senior management experience in the food, agriculture, and retail industry. Since 2013, she's been developing organizational capabilities for Indian Foundation for Humanistic Development, IFHD, and Sneha Kunj Trust. Aruna has designed and implemented impactful programs in biodiversity conservation, sustainable consumption and production, greening economies, to name a few. Now you know why the steep learning curve. I've got to moderate Aruna in. But please join me in welcoming Aruna Rangachar Pohl on stage. Thank you, Aruna. In my previous life, I used to be heading sales. Reaching out to an acclaimed author over a LinkedIn email is by far the most salesperson thing I'd ever done. To our surprise, Pranay actually agreed, responded to the message, and was even kind enough to take time off his busy schedule to hear our story. Pranay Lal's first book, Indica, A Deep Natural History of the Indian Subcontinent, blends India's geological history with its ecological past through the skillful use of fossil records, tracing the formation of the subcontinent in the process. It's been recognized as the first compelling narrative of India's deep natural history by The Hindu, and I completely agree with it. If his first book defies categorization, his second book, Invisible Empire, The Natural History of Viruses, brings together science, history, and great storytelling to paint a fascinating picture of viruses as a major actor, not just in human civilization, but also in the human body. So it's my absolute honor to welcome Pranay Lal on stage. Pranay, welcome. Okay. All right. So that's the first stage, and then this is the second, and then we move here. But I thought I'll begin by introducing one of the characters from our story. Okay. So this enigmatic looking amphibian is called the Indian purple frog. The discovery of Indian purple frog or pig-nosed frog in 2003 is considered within the scientific community to be a significant find. This enigmatic amphibian, found exclusively in the Western Ghats of India, especially only in the southern parts of Western Ghats. Why is it significant? Living under the ground throughout its life and emerging out onto the ground for a very short period, perhaps few days or few weeks in the entire year, their ancient lineage has evolved independently for about 120 million years. Here are few events they witnessed and survived as well. Forming of new continents, wipeout of the great dinosaurs, evolution of mammals, ice age, and finally us humans becoming the dominant species. No wonder it looks like this. It's gone through a lot. Their closest relatives are found in Seychelles Islands, which makes it even more significant and serves as an important piece of biological evidence supporting the existence of the supercontinent Gondwana. So Pranay, let's start with you. I wanted to bring this up because your narrative about them in your book is a treat to read. I know you've gone great lengths in seeing it breed, holding it. Walk us through the formation of Western Ghats, maybe through the story of the Indian purple frog.
Uh, Thank you, Vinod. I think couldn't be a better peg to begin with because you're right. This odd-looking creature has perhaps witnessed so many tumultuous events, not just geological but evolutionary as well. So the time when this creature was living, there were no flowering plants, right? I mean, when it evolved about 140 million years ago, there were no flowering plants. I mean, they would have been ancestors of the early flowering plants, as in the angiosperm plants, but they were too minuscule or too formidable to make, or not too formidable to make any impact on the ecology. So the gymnosperms dominated the forests. And the forests where they're found now are completely changed. They're largely dominated by the angiosperms. There's few gymnosperms that you find in the forests of the Nilgiri now. So that's one major faunal change that they've seen, which I think is very important because you see that change happening in the fossil record. In terms of the geological events that happened, was that the critical one is the separation of India with Madagascar. And I think that's the real story that needs to be told and really cherished in some ways. Let's start with the very beginning. Let's start at say about 720 million years ago, when India and Antarctica and Africa and Madagascar, all of us were cleaved together. And it was for about 500 million years that there was very little perturbation in terms of tectonic movement. And these Gondwanan islands, the southern islands, were welded together. And slowly, there were cracks that were beginning to form. And so Antarctica first started to pair off from South America and southern tip of Africa, the first event that happened. But it was not a clear-cut separation. There were still sutures that were joining these land masses together. But a series of these fireworks, if you were to imagine this and if you were to play the tectonic tape, if I could say that, a videotape of how separations happened, and there were massive volcanic activity that happened from under the sea that shifted continents in a very large way. And it was between 120 million years and 88 million years that the story of this amphibian comes into play. Now, what is very incredible about this creature is that the southern tip of Madagascar, India, Antarctica were perhaps the point of origin of all the modern amphibians. So there was this constant exchange that was happening from these land masses into Africa. Africa had just separated slightly from Madagascar, but it was still a saline water body. And as we know, most amphibians, or largely currently, most amphibians do not tolerate salt water well. So it would have been a massive challenge for amphibians like this creature to have crossed over. So how would they do it? They would cross over into a new continent or a landmass through rafts, or there would be a tree or a log that is floating, and you would have a couple of creatures hanging on. So think about a tree getting washed in a flood, a tropical flood from, say, Kerala, or South Kannada, or say Narmada, and it's getting washed down the sea, and it lands on the eastern coast of Africa, or one of the Indian Ocean islands, and that's where they find their new footing and evolve in a different way. Now, the geneticists want to understand that what creature created the next creature, what life form led to the formation of the next life form. So that's the interesting story that genetics tells us. But it's also geology that tells you that story, because you need to now look at the tectonic events that actually cause the creation of these land masses, and how genetics informs us about the creation of these life forms. So it's a fascinating story. It's something that's evolving, because we keep finding very, very interesting species of frogs and other amphibians as well in the Western Ghats. And the same is happening in Indian Ocean and in east coast of Africa, and also South America, because the hopping process did not end just with Africa. I mean, the process continued. We're talking of millions of years, right? Uh, and a million years in evolutionary scale is pretty significant. Just to let you know, I mean, just to give you a sense of what I mean about a million years. Imagine that most of the songbirds that you see outside, you know, uh, whichever bird that you've heard just now this morning, chances are that they've emerged somewhere between 22,000 to 9,000 years ago. So most of the birds that we see today, the modern birds, are actually a creation of the last great ice age. So it's an incredible thing, because our earliest ancestors, people who left Africa, would have encountered different kinds of birds. They would have not seen the bulbul. I mean, perhaps they would have seen a bulbul, but it would have been slightly different. So in the point I'm making here is that the frogs too have had a series of isolations and events in which they met again, and that communion and the opportunity of genes mixing again is an incredible one. And I think we still do not have a full picture of how different amphibians or even birds or any other creature have actually come to be the way they are in a full sense. So that full circle, we have some fuzzy or a hazy understanding of how species got here, but the understanding is only going to get better resolution with understanding species and other relatives and cousins far removed in a genetic and a geological sense. I don't know if I've rambled too on, but
No, no, no. It's a great. I love the fact that the songbirds are just after the ice age. Does that mean that prior to it, the world was a lot more quieter, or was it a crass sound and it's more beautiful now?
We would never know, because I think if again, I mean, if you were to talk to an anatomist,
Yeah.
and you were to show them the throat and the bill structure, they would be able to predict that this bird was a had a shrill call, or had a soothing call. They would be able to say something about it.
Sure.
So, but again, we can't be very, very sure about
Yeah.
things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. You touched upon the fact that we are evolving our understanding on each of these, including our understanding on Western Ghats. And in your book, you often write about this whole notion of everything together. You're multiple places, you're the big picture guy. What does big picture tell us about understanding Indian ecological history? How mature is our understanding towards it? And especially with places like Western Ghats and the Sundarbans and the Himalaya regions, we've got a lot of hotspots in India. How ecologically significant is this? How much do we know about it?
So in terms of geology, you know, so let me step back a bit and let me say this, that just like the number of species of mammals we have on Earth is the exact number is of rocks that we have classified. So so rocks and minerals are also species because they are things that have evolved alongside not just uh, the violent nature of the earth of minerals mixing and colliding and heated and put under pressure underwater or oxygenating themselves, but there is also the action of microbes that create minerals. So there's several minerals. For example, agate. Agate is a mineral that is largely created by the action of underwater oxygen production in depleted oxygen conditions, where some life form emerges and creates a silicaceous body, and that's what leads to the creation of agate, right? There can be other reasons for creation of agates also, but one of the main reasons of opals and agate is the biological force. So you have minerals creating microbes and life forms creating minerals. So that interaction is fascinating. And I think that's something that we don't appreciate much. The second thing that I think is incredible about Western Ghats is that we see it as a linear, a chain, but it's taken us several. I mean, each fragment of the Western Ghats has been created at different times and in different processes. Sometimes it's collision, sometimes it's compression, sometimes it's subduction. Subduction means when the mountainous region or a plain that just subsides suddenly. I mean, just because the movement of landforms is such that it just collapses. So, I mean, one of the recent discoveries, which I think I must tell, and I was talking to Rohit outside that my book begins with Nandi Hills being the oldest part of India. Well, actually, it's now wrong. We found an older rock than that, and it's also in it's in this belt, but it's in the Western Ghats, closer to the Western Ghats, not the Western Ghats. It's near Coorg, and there's this isolated hill which is about 4.1 billion years old. So it actually pushes the age by about 400 million years. So we had imagined that the oldest rock in peninsular India was about 3.6, 3.7. But when you come to about 4.1 billion years, you're talking, so close to the origin of the Earth, because Earth originated 4.567. It's a lovely number to remember. Earth emerged in its current form 4.567 billion years ago, right? And if this rock is 4.1 billion years old, so it's basically 450 million years younger. I mean, the Earth had only just formed, and the rocks were still forming. So I think that story is fascinating. That if I think I've been pleading to the two governments, the state government of Tamil Nadu and the central government, that this isolated hill needs to be protected. Perhaps is now the oldest province, rock province, in the world. It actually competes with the others. So should it not have protection, right? Of course, it is under protection. I mean, it's got it's under forest and all that. So I think I'm digressing, but let me just come to the story of the Western Ghats. So Western Ghats, like I said, is not a single. Let's not look at it as a monolith. It's amazing amount of diversity, even in terms of rocks. So you've got, if you start from the southern tip, if you start from Nagarcoil, if that's the beginning of the Western Ghats, because there's no clear definition of where Western Ghats begin or end in terms of geology or biodiversity. I think it's a very fuzzy area. But for me, if I were to look at rocks, I would say it starts at Nagarcoil and ends at somewhere near the Dangs, somewhere southern Dangs in Gujarat. And that, to me, is Western Ghats. I mean, we can debate this. I think a lot of geologists and paleontologists and ecologists would differ. I mean, but that's something that, because it's taken so many billion years in the making, there can be no easy answer. But let's say that we start from Nagarcoil. You've got, for about 80 kilometers till you reach Trivandrum, you've got a single, granitic zone which is unique. I mean, it's amazing. The only other replicable rock is in Antarctica. Just move a little north, it's very different. You come till Achankovil River in Kerala, it's a different type of a granitoid rock, right? And just keep going on till you hit the Deccan basalt, which again is a layer that has formed over the granitic province. And if you reach, as soon as you come to say Goa, you come to the wonderful lateritic rock. It's this beautiful red porous rock which got heated from below, and it's got this very skeleton looking. It looks like a dried up coral. Uh, just leave Savantwadi and to up to Ratnagiri. Just move north, and you come to again to the Deccan basalt, which is again very fascinating. It's a different kind of basalt. Uh, Again, travel north of Narmada, the basalt province ends for a short time. You reach a large alluvial fan till the Dangs, and you've got a different kind of a forest. The forest between Valsad and Navsari, and up to say the southern Dangs is completely different. The forest type is different. In fact, the dominant trees are different. The fossil types are different. I mean, the pollen structure that we find in soils packed. So what uh, paleontologists do in the absence of large fossils, they look for one of the most enduring thing, one of the hardiest things that you can find in nature, and that's pollen. Pollen does not get destroyed unless it is burnt. It just doesn't destroy because it's made out of siliceous, silica-rich compounds, and silica is very difficult to destroy. So, if you really want to understand a forest of the past, you look at the soil, analyze the pollen structure, and you would know what kinds of grasses or large trees and other things would have lived in deep time. So you would be able to recreate, at least reimagine the kind of forest that would have existed in those times. So I think that's fascinating. I think if you were to actually do a paleo forest thing, that how was the forest 100 years ago in say Kerala versus say southern Karnataka versus other parts of the Western Ghats, you would have a different forest type, entirely different forest type. So, the big myth, or rather the misconception, which I'm trying to fight, is that all rocks are similar. They look the same, right? Or they are, all forests are similar, even if the dominant trees may be different, but the rest of the forest is the same. I don't think that's true, because the ecological services and the biodiversity services that come with the forest and the forest community is incredibly different and diverse, and and hence the services are very different. So I would really urge Mycelium and other groups that are working on conservation to bring this nuanced understanding that not all forests along the Western Ghats, or even within a few kilometers, they are very, very different. So all of it needs to be protected now.
Yeah, and you're right, very right when you say that as soon as you enter the forest, it looks very similar. And people often say that I'm losing out. But when you are in there, you very clearly know it's not the same. It's two different dangerous sections of the same forest, but it's very different. Um, in your book, and also in the newer book of the micro world, you are always on the history part. You're always looking through the past to see if you can find answers. So, why understanding ecological history matters today, and how can it help? Uh, what do we know so far, and how can it help today's generation to make it better or make the earth better?
It's a very difficult question. I think this is I think you need a 3-day conference to actually discuss this,
I
because
think all of them would be okay in staying back for 3 days for this, no problem.
so just to give you an example, I was just trying to when you were posing this question to me, I was kind of not sure how to answer this, because I don't think what the previous generation knew about, say, even things like, say, climate change, or even, I mean, let me ask you this question. What, according to you, is the biggest photosynthesizer in the world? Everybody would say trees, right? Algae, great. You're getting closer, but it's not even algae. It's another kind of a microbe, but yeah, you're close. But so yeah, it's planktons and that microbial community in the top 80 meters of the oceans and seas and lakes. That's, and it took us till about 1995, 96 when the first paper started to say that the biggest carbon barriers and the largest oxygen producers are not trees, you know. So we really do not understand our environmental systems. And if you were to look at the current debates that are happening on climate change, for example, we are heavily invested in planting trees. I love trees. Please don't get me wrong. I love trees. I love grasses. I love lichen. All of them. But spare a thought that we need to be conserving deep lakes, rivers, even salt pans. Salt pans are essential for sulfur cycle. Deserts are important to keep evergreen forests alive. You know, this is something that dawned in, I think, 2004, 2005. NASA was looking at pictures of a big dust storm moving west into Azores from the Sahara westwards to Canary Islands, Azores, into Brazil and Central America. And there they found that the amount of sand that gets carried from the Sahara is so much and so incredible and so important because it fertilizes the evergreen forests. The evergreen forests, because they have so much humic acid, because there's such a large amount of litter that falls, and there's a huge amount of precipitation. So there's water flowing through the Amazon. In fact, the Amazon, parts of the Amazon sink during the monsoon, the South American monsoon, right? I mean, there's an entire flooding that happens. But how does the Amazon get its nourishment, its nutrients? It comes partly from the Sahara. So the corals of the Caribbean actually depend, the phosphate and the phosphorus content, the iron content comes from Sahara, right? There is no iron in all of the Caribbean islands, or even in there is some iron in Mexico, but it doesn't leach into the Caribbean Sea. So think about it, that all these interlinked things that we find. We classify deserts and semi-arid areas as wastelands. I think we make a major mistake when we do that. I don't think I'm answering your question. I'm just digressing. But the point I'm making here is that how much do we know? I don't think we know anything. We only have basic understanding of how the systems perhaps are interconnected. We don't even know the utility function, as Richard Dawkins says. What is God's utility function for a species? A single species vanishes, a tree species get extinct, and along with the tree and the bird, there are other microbes that depended on them also die. So what is the question? But the question is, now a larger question is that how does that play out in the long term? Although that piece, that small community has got extinct in a larger forest, the extinction of the dodo, we now realize that about 18 other trees and plant species died out because of the dodo not consuming the fruits and the seeds of those plants, right? So it is not just that a dumb bird, which could not fly and was easy meat, got extinct. There were several other things, and now perhaps in the future we're going to discover even more when it comes to microbes and fungi and lichen that depended on the dodo's droppings or anything else. We don't know, right? So the question is, let us all be very humble as we start to relish and love and nurture the forest, that there is so much that nature has to teach us. And it's not just the basic sciences. We might have cracked the genome and the genetic code and all of that, but how does it play out in the real world, and how does that all interact? It's something which is incredible. We will take generations before we start to say that I think we now understand this ecosystem. I think, I don't know. I don't think I answer your question.
No, you did. And Great Migration of Sands is a great book you could add next. But it's fascinating to know that we don't consider activity of migration. It's very lively, and things like sand migrating all the way in whatever format. It still is. Would you say it's a migration? Or would you say it's just the way it works? And if the climate doesn't have, I mean, let's assume that the impact of climate is there. Does that mean there's a whole new world of extinction we could see coming if it stops migrating all the way to the Canary Islands?
Well, I think there's going to be a significant change
Correct.
in the community, the plant community, and the creatures that depend on the sand. The first digesters of the sands are going to depend on it, and therefore the larger trees and others who depend on the phosphorus, potassium, and the iron that comes from those sands. I think that's critical. While you were asking the question, my mind was racing into another issue, and that was to ask that question. um, do we know enough in terms of how much we need to manipulate nature in order to understand what's going to be the larger impact of it? For example, I'm quite not happy with the green shields that Africa is making. Uh, I know that the desert is spreading. I grew up in Africa, North Africa, so I know the desert. I could say that I know it rather well. It is a bleak place, but it's also so lively. It's an amazing part of the world. If the natural processes are such that the desert has to expand, there's got to be forests that will grow in other parts, because that nourishment from the wind systems will get carried away to a new place. It would either create new coral, or it will create a new rainforest or a deciduous forest. The same thing is true for Kerala. I mean, it's not just, I mean, the story about the Sahara Desert reaching Amazon is not the only one. We know that the desert dust that comes from the Horn of Africa and from Eastern Sahara and the Saudi Arabian Peninsula comes to Kerala and goes across as far as the Dangs. Well, I mean, so the nourishment is a mutual process. There's a symbiotic process happening across the oceans, right? Yeah. So yeah, I don't have a clear answer on this. I think perhaps like I said, it's going to take uh, several centuries before we actually can understand the larger systems at play. Uh, on migration, sorry, there's another point. A creature that migrates the most compared to its body length are microbes in the oceans, because they rise and fall every night. They come up in the early, when the sun comes out, they come from the bottom of the ocean or closer to the bottom of the ocean, rise up and descend again. So, that cycle of plankton and other, microscopic creatures who live longer than a day, because most microscopic creatures in the oceans live only a day, maximum a week. A few live a few months. But those creatures that go with the churning, it's with the temperature and the sunlight which is driving their migration day in and day out. That's an incredible migration that we don't talk about. We love to talk about the Arctic tern, the dragonflies that move from Africa to India, to central India. Uh, those are fascinating stories. I mean, let's not discount that. But I think the more humble creatures are the ones we don't celebrate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Great. Aruna, our focus now moves to you. On chapter one, we sort of heard Pranay. We looked at how to observe Western Ghats, and I'm going to come back to you, Pranay, with a bunch of more questions. But I'm sort of breaking this as chapter two, which is all about interpretation. Um, I can't think of any example of positive interpretation of nature other than our tribal communities, and you work with a lot of them in Western Ghats. They've been practicing conservation through coexistence for a long, long time. They were kadus, or sacred groves, sacred ponds, and stretches of sea coast from which all fishing is prohibited, are all telltales of community-driven conservation time. So my first question to you is, what does Western Ghats mean to these communities you work with? How do they perceive nature around them?
Yeah, thank you. My head is still reeling from Pranay's, universe, Durdrishti view, and coming back to the, zoom in view to one particular community that lives in the Western Ghats. So I may be a bit all over the place.
No, no, no. Please don't worry about it.
Yeah, but it was fascinating, Pranay. Absolutely fascinating. I felt like I was having a live conversation, on takeoff or going forward from the Sapiens. Uh, and that book took me long enough to digest. So, but yeah, so coming back to what we do in the Western Ghats and the kind of organization that has worked on conservation ground up. I think for us, I can only say it in very simple terms that we map the science to the traditional wisdom that already exists within communities. Uh, they know it, I mean, possibly, oral traditions of looking at sacred groves, like you mentioned, or Devarkadu in the Western Ghats. Specifically, we primarily work in the central Western Ghats and the coastal Karnataka. And when we talk to those communities, it's like a lot of it is wisdom is already lost. So us trying to revive and trying to understand and mapping it from a scientific point of view to say, okay, so this is what their understanding, and these are the kind of species that existed. It's all folklore. It is sometimes also, songs in plays, oral traditions, religious texts, uh, rituals, plenty. So there's that itself, like the story of migration. There's also been migration within communities here. And when you talk about the kind of amalgamation of cultures that's already happened, we feel that unless there is a kind of, looking at the pieces in the puzzle, so where we have the zoom out view, and then you come into the zoom view and you look at the pieces of the puzzle. So for us, as having worked with communities, we look at, okay, fine. So we understand how important the bee species is to the surrounding ecosystem in terms of its evolution. When you talk about the Devarkadus, till today we can see those species there. Some of the photographs that are outside, we see them. I've seen them myself, some of them, and you the diversity you see in that small, say we work on mapping, identifying and mapping freshwater swamps. And among them, say we've mapped, there were only about 50 as per official records, but we kind of discovered a few more. And so as of now, 110 of them are scientifically mapped. And out of these, we identified, on the basis of speaking to communities who live around these areas, we identified about 11 of them which are classified sacred swamps. And swamps are a kind of whole ecosystem by itself, with the multiple layers that Pranay mentioned earlier. The microbes, the amphibians, the flora, fauna, multiple kind of species, even the larger primates like the lion-tailed macaque, which is again endangered. When you look at the sacred swamps, uh, you would find that the communities, through various rules and rituals and religious multiple faiths, they created this system of protection. And the weirdest thing is, when we started researching these, we found that many of these conserved or pristine ecosystems are closest to habitation, not furthest. You wouldn't think they are deep interior. You'd think, and that kind of gets you thinking, and that's what the research actually revealed, that communities understood the ecosystem services being provided or provisioned by these local ecosystems. And so they created these rules saying, you're the closest to habitation. You see that these, say, you talk of the freshwater swamps, kind of a perennial water source. So they had these rituals around Chaudi, which is a goddess, um, and how she needs to be, what do you say, kept happy. And so there were certain things that were rules put in place. There were certain rituals there. You couldn't do this, you could do that. You can't take out any of the leaf, or even a twig you couldn't remove from that sacred preserved area. And when you think about I believe the population increase around these habitats now is 40, 50 times more than what it was earlier. I mean, as per known history. And in spite of that, these areas have stayed the same, more or less, in pristine. In fact, we use the sacred groves. There are a lot of degradation that's happened. for various reasons. We know that, that's development as we know it. So there have been a lot of land use change. There's been a lot of degradation that's happened to those swamp areas or the habitat of the LTMs, various other wildlife, or even native trees. And we find there that when these communities are kind of given these rituals and these belief systems, the believers act as a kind of a sena, to protect and to stop. So there is always, they have the core zone, which is your nothing can move from there. And then they have the buffer zone in place. So all of these are through discussions with the religious leaders there, or each one had a role in society where they were able to say, okay, so this person looks after the water part of it. And so the rituals conducted around the water goddess was done by this particular community. This other community looks after the other species in terms of, the frogs, etc. So there was the Naga, the god, serpent god. Um, there was, of course, the mother goddess of all, for who had to be appeased all through the year. Very interesting. And, in light of the recent Kantara and Ganda the Gudi kind of movies that have come out, it's nice that these have come onto the mainstream consciousness. Uh, there is a reason uh, behind a lot of the conservation practices. Uh, if you can kind of align those practices without, to with the idea or the knowledge of the ecological provisions they provide to the communities. Uh, sponge, freshwater water swamps act as sponges. They perennially, they provide, they feed water throughout the year to the five major river systems that emerge out of the Western Ghats. The Western Ghats, the unique bioreserve that it is, it also controls or decides the monsoon patterns. So there's just so much, the interconnectedness that Pranay brought out. We actually see that happening on the ground, and we see that the understanding that communities have, maybe perhaps intuitive or maybe on the basis of lores, folklores around it. Idin madidre idagatte, bhuta barutte. There is a bhuta god also for protecting the swamps. So the kind of interlinkages that they have been able to bring forth, it's helped us a lot in the kind of work we do. The traditions continue, even though there has been quite a bit of external influences. Don't really know to what extent, but I think there's a very important, especially understanding, we're getting more and more about microbial ecosystems. I think there's a very urgent need to start looking at these pristine sacred groves or sacred swamps as your reference ecosystem, and then try to see, what science, what technology. I'm actually a fan of technology, though I'm a bit of a dadi in technology, but still, I do understand the ecosystem mapping, understanding, using all of those tools to see how these reference ecosystems can be replicated. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And I did a little bit of research on Devar Kadus and the conservation of the community. But one interesting fact was they've done a study on the Amazon Indians and the ones who live on Amazon. Many centuries ago, they had vocabulary for 500 to 800 words around their ecosystem, which even as English vocabulary, we don't know what a leaf does, but they could go have a vocabulary for a particular leaf, like the sundew has one, the lantern has one, like this. They had different, so they knew their ecosystem very well than we do. My next question to you, Aruna, is The narrative of everything getting destroyed often overshadows the positive work a lot of the communities do and continue to do. For them, an extinction cannot happen. It's part of their life. They understand the threshold of abundance. They know when it is down. They know how to control it. Can you highlight a couple of positive work some of the community members in the Western Ghats are doing for the conservation, from a conservation purpose?
Yeah, a lot of it they do actually. So conservation is very community centric. They are the leaders, they are the change makers on the ground. They are also extremely, what do you say, protective. It really, I think, if there are influences from the outside, we've also seen them, and this has been a part of our own history as Sneha Kunja, working with these communities. Is, when the marine ecosystem a few years ago, a decade ago, was threatened due to the thermal project that was to come up in that Sharavati region. The protests that were led by the local community leaders, right to the point that, of course, there were a few helpful souls who could get their voice heard, made it, made the government actually reverse its decision. So I think that's community activism at its best. Another thing is that when you talk about these communities, there one of the things I said was the rituals and the rules that governed the forest habitats. There was a community that decided, what wild fruits could be harvested, what medicinal plants could be harvested, and how much. And they decided, and they put a ban. So, they knew how much they need to take and how much would sustain them and how it would be beyond. Of course, one of the first reasons why we started work in the Western Ghats was in 2013. Uh, mm, my champion change maker, I call him, he was Narsimha Hegde. He's a forest ecologist.
He's most likely listening to it on YouTube.
Yes. So, yeah, okay, wonderful. So Narsimha is, I've trekked the Western Ghats and the coastal areas with him through. He takes great pleasure taking me during the monsoons with a real slime and slug fest and leech fest. So it's been very inspiring, and a lot of my learning has come from him, and of course all the interactions which I've enjoyed with the forest dwellers. You see some amazing diversity of indigenous communities. He hates the word tribal, so I'll avoid using that. Indigenous communities that live there, and so these come from as far as Africa. We've interacted. They are superb, wild bee honey collectors. They climb the tallest, the Indian rock bee. They are the honey harvesters. Um, they they have, of course, amalgamated into the local culture. They look Indian. They speak a kind of dialect from there, but the features are quite originally African. And there are a few other such communities, indigenous communities. So what really sorry, you'll have to remind me of the question.
The honey. The question. Yeah. This is around the positive
Yes.
world.
So there's a whole lot that community. One thing is, say, vanishing species of indigenous trees, and we have a lot of community-owned tree nurseries. Patta patta unko pata hai. So they kind of have the traditional names for it, and they go collecting into the forest. They bring out the pods, they bring out the saplings, and then we support them in scientific methods of propagation for these community. And these community-owned tree nurseries are supplying. It's a sustainable activity as a livelihood, and they supply these tree saplings now to the Department of Forest. And so it's a kind of, we also have the system of village forest community, village forest committees. the British had another uh, an inherited system now, which still the communities follow there, which was called the Sopinabetta. And these bordered the Havyaka farmlands, orchards, basically areca and other kinds of pepper orchards. And obviously, the British were interested in protecting their pepper supply. And so, what they did basically was they created this system where rights were given on these adjoining lands with the condition that forest cover has to be maintained. So, these beta lands, after the British left, the rights continue with the community. They have village forest committees that have been formed who take a common governance approach over these beta lands. And then the Department of Forest is technically the overseer or the man, but they do nothing about it. So there's been a lot of good amount of degradation that has happened. These were basically, common for the pepper growers to get their green leaf manure, other grazing lands, etc. And so with this degradation, now with the communities, we've started the whole idea of restoring these beta lands. The beta lands also formed a very important forest corridor for, the primates, especially the lion-tailed macaque, which is highly endangered. So for me, it's like if the tiger, tiger is the poster boy of World Wildlife Fund, conservation. For us in the Western Ghats, it's the lion-tailed macaque.
Yeah.
Extremely shy, beautiful creature. We have a couple of photos, I think, outside.
Outside, yes. And it's funny, Abhishek is here. Abhishek told me to look at this on our way from Mangalore to Bangalore. As soon as you start crossing, I think, Agumbe, supposedly there's a family of lion-tailed macaques who have been driven into this human conflict so much that they've now started begging. They are very shy, but just this family, and you can, as soon as you drive in, we saw them, because we couldn't take a U-turn, it's such a small road, but they're no different than the other primates who are also on the street, but you don't get to see them, and they're so unique, but they've gotten into our world, and it's very unfortunate, but they're beautiful. They're also endemic to Western Ghats as well. So they are beautiful. Thank you. And I can correlate with the loss of train of thought, especially in a theme like Western Ghats or ecology, because preparing for this event, I have crashed my Chrome 9 times because every tab leads to another. Oh my God, what is this? Oh my God. So I can only imagine the train of thoughts, how it is. So please don't worry about it. I'm going to come back to Pranay, you now. The third chapter we want to split. We spoke about observing and understanding, a little bit of the ecological history. We'd love to hear the 3-day lecture. We'll probably come back and call you for it. We interpreted it from some aspect of the community, and I'm sure there are more stories as well. And then the third one is nurturing around it, and how do we think about putting some of this together in today's world. So this is for the both of you, and the question is common, and either one of you could pick and then follow it up. Is where do we begin as city dwellers to learn a little more about the importance of losing nature? And the reason is, the more I read, the more I understand that the further you're away and the further the actor is taken away from the consequence, there is no more remorse for it. And I don't care if a species of ants go extinct because I'm in Whitefield in Bangalore and it doesn't matter. But for the community, that is a big deal, and they're fighting for their lives to protect it. So if we were to begin understanding as city dwellers some aspect of what this really means, the significance, where can we begin? Either one of you could take it up.
Okay, so I'm going to start from the point that Aruna made about microbes. I think the fact that the world is run by microbes. I mean, think about it. 30% of our mass is microbes, right? And my second book, let me just say that it also started here because I did this podcast with Pawan Srinath, which actually got transcribed into the book. But I talk about how viruses are important for you. While we were cursing COVID, and I was at the front lines of looking at the COVID pandemic. I mean, part of it, a small part of it, in a hospital in Delhi. Um, the challenge is that we tend to say that all viruses are bad, all microbes are bad, those kind of things. Ant dying in a sacred grove has no meaning for you in Whitefield. The interconnectedness is where the whole story comes in, and like the dodo example that I gave. So the sooner we start to appreciate this, that how no matter how tenuous the linkage is, it still has to be maintained. I also said that there are minerals and rocks that are the same numbers as mammals, exactly the same numbers actually. Uh, there are rocks that are getting extinct because we are putting them in our homes, or we are pulverizing it to extract on the ore. That's happening, right? So there are landscapes both above and underground that are getting pulverized, excavated, raped. I think that's something that we have to look at. So if that goes, you're changing the nature of not just the landscape, but also the subterranean levels of water. You're talking about changes in the quality of soil, because how water moves around that rock or soil is very different. So it's like a minesweeper game. You make a subtle change in one very tiny part of a very large landscape, and you think that just extracting that rock is not going to hurt anybody. But we need to also start looking at what is the sustainable level of extraction that we need to do for rocks as well. And I think the same is true for everything. uh, we we still don't know. Like I said, we don't know what runs, uh, what keeps ecosystems in balance. We don't know that. We still don't know which is the largest oxygen provider in the world. So the story that I talk about in my second book is that if all the viruses in the world were to go on strike for just one day, there was going to be massive extinction. For example, your stomach is going to burst open because what keeps your bacteria in check in your gut are viruses. So let's not pray for things that we don't know about, right? It's very foolhardy of us to say, let's all use antiretrovirals and get rid of, say, viruses. I think that's where we are just now. I think that's what we do with chemicals. I think that's what we do with so many of these extraneous things that we get into our lives, uh, many of which we extract from nature and release it in high concentration in another part, right? I think so many things. I mean, you've got batteries that are being made from ores that are being procured from Bolivia and Peru, and coltan that's coming from Congo. It's all going into our phones or in our cars, electric vehicles. But what happens after that? What happens after that rock gets extinct there? And you have a concentration of mineral here. There's going to be immense damage to the larger ecosystem of Peru or Congo or wherever. And the same is happening here. I mean, we not just those two come to mind because they are most relevant to us, because we can't live without our phones. But the same could be said about, say, steel, because we've been extracting iron ore or coal that we've been extracting. All these things need to have a limit, and I don't think we understand that at all. So completely driven by economics and not ecology. That's, I think, the crux of the current inequities, whether it's at the community level or the larger global, business level. I think that needs a, a framework to bring in the balance. And I'm not sure. I think I'm treading into your territory. So yeah,
Right.
it's good.
Yeah, Aruna.
That's a nice seg for me. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that thing about payment for ecosystem services is a conceptual understanding of what are the capitals that belong on a balance sheet. And when we talking about all the extractive businesses or all the extractive companies, across the world. So that was possibly the way of life, and that's what was, from the point of view of understanding, or our frame of reference was that point of time. We've come down, we have traversed this path. I'm not too sure what extent we can traverse back. I don't think we can live without our phones, electricity, etc. But how do we get to the point where we, like Pranay said, not reduce everything down to its minuscule essence? Everything is a single, uh, urea is like NPK, nitrogen, for, it's not necessary. Why not look at holistic, look at other balances, that using something in its entirety, replacing it, ensuring that you don't have an overbalance. These are things that perhaps are some things, that learnings that we can do things to reset the button. And I think the reset button is in the hands of us, in the hands of our communities. I definitely think it's in the hands of our communities, because they're understanding. See, they live a de facto sustainable life, not because they don't want to have the things that we all have. uh, they also have the same set of aspirations. So it's we behaving like, I mean, the global north behaves to the global south, and we NGO guys like to really blame everything on the global north. But we have the same attitude the city dwellers have over our rural communities. And so what we do here, with the level of plastic we use, with the level of the lack of understanding of what water bodies are, what's the important ecosystems that these water bodies in cities, lakes. A pet love or hate for Bangalore is the destruction or the rejuvenation of lakes. Um, we do a bit of rejuvenation of lakes, but based on biodiversity and ecological principles. These are small lakes, but if you look at the budget of a BBMP or the Lake Development Authority, it's like development is concretizing, putting the lights, cutting off all the shrubbery so there are no snakes or whatever it is. And these are things perhaps we need to rethink. We need to perhaps have a bit more, and by being part of a city which is has a worldwide reputation, citizens here can raise the voice for our Western Ghats. It's our backyard. A lot of what happens here is getting impacted there. Similarly, from there to the rest of the world, the interconnectedness is, I mean, is just so obvious. It's hitting us in our face, left, right, center. So if there is a way, I mean, frankly speaking, I have a long wish list. But I don't think I should go through that wish list in front of
You
everyone
should
here.
catch
But I'm
everybody
happy
outside and do
whoever
it. Yeah,
is
yeah,
willing
yeah.
to do. But yes, pollination, bees are dying. Our great Albert Einstein said, if the bees vanish from our earth, the humankind vanishes within, I don't know, less than 4 days or something like that, right? So what can we do as city dwellers to keep that pollination? It can't be possible in the city. Here we go spraying buildings where those hives are formed with pesticides. So you add to the whole mess. So what can we do for reviving water bodies, or creating a biodiversity zone around water bodies, so that you can create a safety. You can have migratory birds come in. There are multiple things one can do. So everything, if we can connect it to actually this whole concept of sustainable consumption and production, I think that way would be the way to go. Planting trees, yes, but in the right ones, in the right place, like he said. So let's not just kind of, go plant the pongemias or whatever. So I don't know. Like I said, I have a wish list, and I'd be most happy to collaborate with anyone here or anyone listening in from far on the multiple um, mini projects one can take up to keep the whole in view all the time, and then just see, okay, what's that little bit that we can tackle? It's like a knitting, the pieces kind of are so well connected to each other. So if there a way to you know look at a certain pattern or a certain design and say, okay, I fit this in here, let me fix this. Perhaps we will get there. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you. We'll open up questions from the audience while I ask my next question. If you've got a question, yeah, please hold your questions. A bunch of more are there. Perfect. There are a lot of young ecologists listening in on YouTube live today. There are quite a few of them. Maybe from, I know you mentioned ecology and you are a little far away, but you are at the receiving end of what an ecologist is taught. The impact comes to you. So we'd love to hear your opinion, maybe Pranay, you as well. How does the future look for them? For the young ecologists who are just stepping into the field, what does the future look for them?
I think we are witnessing the sixth extinction in different ecosystems at different rates. So I think it's a very exciting time. You're going to see what happened. You could perhaps now develop models of all the previous five great extinctions. Actually, there are 11, but five are major. So, depending on the speed at which we build different kinds of we study different kinds of ecosystems. I think you could build models of saying, oh, this is what perhaps happened in the Permian, or this happened in the Silurian age, or whatever, right? So that's possible. I just wanted to actually go back one point that you were talking about, Western Ghats being in the backyard of Bangalore. I think had the Western Ghats not been there, Bangalore's weather would have been completely different. You would have been a semi-arid zone because, a bit like, Tirunelveli and, that area, the central, south central Tamil Nadu. So it would have come till about central Karnataka. And that's because of that Palghat gap and two other minor gaps that give you that wonderful weather that you are blessed with. So I think, the Western Ghats contribute immensely, both in terms of moisture, even when during the non-monsoon periods, there's enough capture of the moisture from the sea breeze that comes in towards the land, and also the trees in the area between Bangalore and the sea that provide their moisture to you. The cooling effect is largely attributable to the physiography of the Western Ghats. So I think that's a reason for you to celebrate the Western Ghats, if not for anything else.
Perfect. So we owe Western Ghats the pleasure of Ilayaraja, hot budgies and bondas during the weather. I get it now. I get it. Aruna, your thoughts on what is the future looking for people who are getting into a field, either as ecologists or as the executioners?
Yeah, I think ecologists are the sexy breed now. Narasimha has always been sexy, so there I'm pleasing him some more. But then, yes, because let's leaving aside this, I want to come back to that, payment for ecosystem services, right? Polluter pays principle. These are all very important kind of hooks that ecologists and upcoming ecologists can actually have a voice in. Because with this, the carbon markets are hot. I mean, we implement quite a few. We implemented India's first blue carbon project with the conservation of mangroves, degraded mangroves in the Uttara Kannada region. Now we're expanding it to about 600 hectares. And these are certified, verified carbon credits. And these are bought by companies in the voluntary carbon market. That money flows into conservation. That money flows to communities. So the way we've done it is that the agreement on, say, this many private farmers who've given their fallow lands, actually, the acidic saline lands bordering the estuaries, they have given their lands, and we have about 150 plus farmers who've signed these agreements to conserve them for 15 years. And the carbon credits from these, because mangroves are the most efficient carbon sinks. Actually, the freshwater swamps are even more efficient than mangroves in being a strong carbon sink. But unfortunately, these standards for verified carbon credits from freshwater swamps are not decided yet by the voluntary carbon markets. And so that's the reason why we said that communities and ecologists and youngsters, they can kind of see perhaps where this dollar gets invested, how it gets invested. Uh, uh, you know, if you have to plant trees, like I said, plant the right trees in the right places. If you have to conserve mangroves, look at it, not, a single fast growing species. And forest department says, मैंने कर दिया, मेरा 500 hectare ban gaya. But what? One, that Kandla will keep repeating itself. So where's diversity, right? There's so much that happens with 1 hectare of mangroves getting conserved as per ecological principles. Uh, uh, the marine life, the nesting opportunities for various fishes, etc., the diversity, so many things that you can actually link to what happened in this small little patch. I just find it amazing. I'm kind of so looking at I mean, again, I'm digressing here, but I'd like to bring it here because communities know this. There are all these systems they have these processes. There are where we work, there are these Gajani lands, they call them. I mean, not the Gajani movie guy, but Gajani lands. These are lands that border the mangroves, or they between the sea and the freshwater. And they had this very complicated like the Dutch have that water sluice gate system. They had mastered this. Now it has become extinct. And here they used to grow rice, which was the Kagga variety. We're trying to now revive that system to talk to these Gajani landowners. Like Gajanis are the parts large. I mean, you have like thousands of hectares of fallow lands which don't have a single owner, and they have been left fallow because there's no other agriculture possible there. So we're looking at these lands to talk to, there's various Gajanis are like patidars, like the godfathers of those patches of lands, and then to see how we can work with the Gajanis to implement or revive Kaga rice varieties which are saline resistant, saltwater resistant rice. I mean, how amazing is that? And they had, these medicinal purpose, kind of diabetic friendly rices, all kinds of. So there's just so much diversity, even in just looking at food, how our food systems have been corrupted by the mainstream understanding of scale. How can we have a more food systems approach to localize food consumption and production? All of that is circular economy. All these are buzzwords, perhaps, but we can actually see them happen in small pockets where we work. And it would be wonderful to see scale in the light of replication and adaptation rather than cookie cutter large scale, where stuff gets trucked miles and miles, adding to the carbon. Yeah, so multiple things that I can think.
Got it. Okay, I think we had a gentleman there with the question. The microphone's coming from behind.
Hi, my name is Deepak Basavaraj and I represent a team called Ingala, which means carbon in Kannada. And it's not just questions, I have a few things which I'll share and it's for all of you. So first, I see some foreigners here, so I'd like to share that when Aruna means Devara Betta, it means God's. Devara Kado means it's God's forest. So in India, if we relate anything to religion, so people follow it, and that's what it is. So it's just that. And Soppina Betta means greens, hillock of greens. So greens is what humans and animals consume. So just sharing that. And I'd like to, this is for Pranay, that when he mentioned dodo of Mauritius, it was an amazing bird. And there's another thing to Mauritius, and coming from history, which Pranay is favorite thing, that Mauritius is believed to have, during the tectonic a few million years ago, have broken off from Western Ghats, and that's so Mauritius and Western Ghats have similar biodiversity, and Mauritius is one of the world's fastest degrading biodiversities. Very unfortunate. So should we be concerned about Western Ghats in that sense? So one is that. Why I know this? I work in the realm of permaculture, regenerative agriculture, soil regeneration. So that's my forte. I do that for a living. So I'm a natural farming consultant in holistic, approach. So that's how we design farms and do the soil. We have successfully regenerated soils in Kurukshetra, Haryana, where conventional farming experts have said either kuch nahi hogega, which literally means nothing will grow here. And in 25 days after we have worked with the soil, earthworms were found. We don't introduce, it's there. So our people just took out earthworms. So we can do it. We have to work with Mother Nature, just sync with her, basically. So one is the dodo part, which he mentioned, is amazing. So every day there are birds and animals and microbes which are going extinct, and we don't even know about them. And I haven't read Pranay's book yet, but it's there in our list to purchase. So one of the one of our Bibles is The Hidden Life of Trees. If many of you would have, like, Peter Wollobin's book, it's an amazing book, and I would like to share a few things. That is, one is Aruna's efforts, and her people are out there, and the produce being sold is from your this thing, right? She's selling it for like dirt cheap. No way I'll sell it at that price. Bangaloreans will say, "Oh, something is wrong with this. That's why it's being sold." It's the city dwellers, please, we have to work on the pricing. Okay. So because we work with farmers all the way in Nagaland, Haryana, Chhattisgarh, and I connect produce. I'm 48 years old. I've never had allopathic medicine in my life. Even an accident, rib bone broken, I treated it with plants. Okay, Haddi Jod plant works. We humans don't have that patience to undergo pain for a few minutes also. That's the problem. So, and like Aruna has been referring, the indigenous people know things, and then we have to make that effort. It's about awareness. I was in a film festival just last weekend, Alt EFF, if you all were there. So there was a movie about beehives in cities. Amazing movie, done by a lady who was curious that the bees are in this 15th, 16th floor. Every year it's coming back. The, Apis cordata or something like that. Not Apis serrana indica, that's the Indian bee. So there are a lot of people making efforts, but then I guess Vinod's and his team's effort of bringing it together, making it a community. And Mycelium is lifeline. And what a name to have, Mycelium ecology. Wow. So, we have to, the tribe has to increase. And Aruna was mentioning about ecologists being sexy. Yeah, ecologists are the latest software engineers. 20 years ago, what was happening? So 5 years from now, the girl's father will say, if you are into nature, I will get my daughter married to you. Otherwise, no. So that's what it's going to be. And it has to be. Otherwise, things won't work. So everyone has to take interest. So that's what I wanted to share. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to go back to that first question and have Pranay answer that?
Yes.
Which is,
Yes.
why Western Ghats?
What is Pranay aware of this? And a couple of other things for ecologists. There is something called meet.yeti@gmail.com. It's a Google group, meet.yet.
Yeah, all the ecologists are from Meet Yeti.
Oh, okay.
All of them are live from there only.
Great.
Yeah, love
So I mean, for people here, if
Yeah.
they didn't know some of them, so that's there. Yeah.
Perfect. So
it's the question would be, like, if you have come across this, that I have read about it, that Mauritius broke off from the Western Ghats, and the biodiversity of Mauritius is degrading at a very fast pace. So should Western Ghats, or should we be wary of it, or like, what do you think about it?
I think you're spot on. I think although the landmass is similar, the recolonization and colonization of of Mauritius happened multiple times. So there are different species. There are some that crossed over from Madagascar a little later. The relict population that separated from Western Ghats to Mauritius was largely the gymnosperms, right? So because the age of the angiosperms had not begun in full scale. So yeah, I mean, cycads, ferns, palms, all of them are at risk. You're spot on. I think the bigger risk, to my mind, in Mauritius is the excessive planting of sugarcane, which I think there's very little, uh, you know, reserve forest that should have got created, but it's not.
Yeah.
And another thing for me is looking at the extinction uh, of microbes, because they're you know, you have a granitic layer, and then you've got a few other very interesting rocks that exist in Mauritius that developed after that 120 million years ago, when it moved away from India, from the Indian plate. So I think those young rocks also offer such amazing opportunities for growth of, or the evolution of microbes. We don't appreciate that at all. So I think also basalt is very interesting, because there was an overflow of basalt there. So of course, Rodriguez and Mascarene, and the other islands north are also very fascinating.
Yeah, there's a place called Valley do Color in.
Color,
Yeah,
absolutely beautiful. I mean, amazing. I mean, Chamel, for example, the beautiful colors of Chamel rocks
yeah,
are
yeah.
absolutely divine. Yeah.
And one last thing I wanted to share is that reference of Pranay when he said the dust moving. There is a, I mean, some of you may have seen on Netflix Latif Nasir's connected series. The episode is called Dust. So it's from the Republic of Shad and where how it settles down in the Amazon forest. So if some of you want to see it.
Excellent. Thank you so
Thank
much. Thank you. Is there another question? There's one at the back. Yeah. Here, on the right.
Hi, I'm Jayavartini. I'm a researcher in the policy space, and it's really nice to have such a composition in this panel, and it makes me very happy that disciplines are interacting in such a way that it creates an impact as solid as this. A question I had was, you were talking about how folklores and tales from indigenous communities are such thick evidences of conservation practices, customary rights that these communities have had for so long. I wanted to understand if these practices of archiving, or rather knowledge production, does at all translate into the kind of policies we design for conservation, for like designing reserve boundaries and things like that. Is there, or rather, where do you start translating these archival or knowledge production practices into such large scale instruments of change making?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, it's quite miserable as of now. And there's not much research, and especially the Western Ghats, is very little research done, or even in archiving on in terms of the various Devar Kadu, or the kind of rituals and practices of the faiths prevalent, and these are still being practiced. Like I said, in spite of the external influences, these are the sacred groves are still functioning, pristine ecosystems. So there is something to be said about integrating a faith-based approach to conservation involving communities. But I'm afraid it doesn't have the necessary policy space or enough research done. Uh, um, the first so it was in 2013-14 that we were the first to initiate this kind of work, and this has been published in various science international reputed journals. um, Also, subsequent to that, we've had some funding from CEPF, the Critical Ecosystems Partnership Fund, and through that we were able to actually restore 8 out of the 111 degraded swamps. And there we used the reference ecosystems of the sacred swamps. So I don't think it finds somewhere possibly being a more diverse and secular society as we move towards that, and the globalization of cultures, uh, possibly the believer system itself may collapse until and unless it can quickly be supported by, like, I'm saying, we map the scientific evidence to the archival knowledge and wisdom of the communities. And if that then gets the validation, or the conservation scientists validate that significantly, then perhaps it has a space in the policy formation. And that's where we are struggling. We feel like, somewhere you get a bit overwhelmed when you try to look at, oh my god, there's so many things to be done, oh my god, this is the problem, that's so you we where at the implementation level, we feel that a lot. We feel the pressure. We feel the pressure of saying, somewhere, even getting our story across, getting these some kind of mainstream. I mean, thanks to Mycelium, I'm talking here, but who's willing to listen to me, or to many of our communities, right? So I think spaces like these need to be more and more visible uh, in big cities, or where it matters. Also, I have Kim, my colleague sitting next to you, who's been glaring down at me because I haven't brought one very important point into this conversation. Sorry, Kim, and that's gender. Gender and conservation, these have such close interlinks. And this has also been a part of the tradition, part of the roles that women played in conservation and in ecology and understanding of the ecology of the communities they lived in. So we've done research on that, but where does that kind of link into practice, and where does that link into a space where uh, you can say that, okay, fine, these things work, this is evidence, this is the scientific data. Now how do we create a policy, or how do we make an enabling environment for such initiatives to grow and multiply? Yeah.
Got it. Got one question here on the left, and one more here. And I think there's one. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
We'll start with.
There's one question on YouTube. I'll quickly ask that. It's to
Yes.
Pranay. This question is from one person that we know, and he specializes in this thing called as invasive species of lantana. So the question is stemming out of that. So what do you see as the impact of lantana in specific on Western Ghats, and what do you think is the future if the invasion continues, and are we in the right place to interfere and say that we need to do something about it, so to say?
I think the story of lantana is quite well known. I think most of you would know what it is. Lantana, camara, and I mean there are 6 other species. So lantana is this flower that it's a plant. It's a shrub that has very pretty flowers, and many insects, especially butterflies and moths, have come to like it. But that really doesn't mean that it is palatable for the others, especially the browsers. It was introduced in India from Central America in the late 1800s to prevent elephants and gores and other browsers and rampaging animals. Rather, actually, I think that's the word that Troop used it. Troop used it for calling it rampaging animals that who come and invade bungalows. So it was put all along fences of plantations and bungalows to prevent marauding animals. And since then, it's just comes up with these berries which are extremely prolific, and they just strike root. In Central America, it's not weedy. It's become weedy in India because there's no control. There's no biological control for this plant. There's no creature that would feed on it. What is the impact of plants like lantana, or even say parthenium, which came much more recently, 1970s, with PL480. I don't know if there are people here who remember PL480. It's not my initials. It's called Public Lending 480. That was the grant that was given by the government of US when in the 70s it was suspected that India might suffer, or 60s and 70s when India would suffer from a severe famine, and a hunger problem. So I mean, it was largely political, but along with the wheat came these seeds called Parthenium, which is called Congress grass in India. It's actually called Congress grass because the American Congress, passed the bill, and the thing, came and germinated in India in a very, very prolific way. So these, I mean, Eupatorium is another, Cassia tora is another. I mean, there's so many of them that are, widely seen across India. They tend to change two things. One, of course, they outcompete other shrubs, and it's largely through two or three processes. I mean, it could be allelopathy, which means that they don't let any other. They produce these chemicals that deter growth of other plants around them, or there could be special microbial manipulation that prevents the growth of others. So it could be any of these factors. Uh, Therefore, what we are looking at is two things. One, the biomass, like eucalyptus or pongamia or acacia, does not have many digesters. There's no assimilation, no digestion. Therefore, there's no buildup of carbon stock in soil, right? Because eucalyptus, as you know, just stays on the surface. The same thing happens with lantana. You cut a lantana shrub, leave it there, it just does not biodegrade because there are no organisms in India that have evolved in a way to feed on the lantana leaf or the stem. The stem is even more woody and more difficult for it to digest. So I think, uh, you know, the problem is that we'll have to look at eradication if we are trying to look at reviving biodiversity, especially in protected areas. I mean, I don't think, had it been a sane country, I mean, New Zealand would certainly not, for example, or Costa Rica would not allow the sale of lantana in nurseries. But you go to any good nursery, even in the Lal Bagh nursery, you'll find a lantana plant. Why should it be available? You know, why is this not a bioterror? Why is it not on the list of putting it as a plant that should be, not should be hugely discouraged? So I think that's where the problem is. I don't think I'm making sense. It is a forest killer, but it kills, not just the trees, but shrubs and lichen and mosses and nematodes and microbes. I think look at it as a whole system, because the foresters have seen it only because it does not promote the growth of sal or teak or arjun or something. I mean, that's not the point. I mean, the point is larger. It's just not a single tree that was. It's like like Aruna said. We attribute too much to the tiger. I mean, the tiger is charismatic. The same thing happens with the forest trees also. I don't think we have to invest so much of our efforts in saying getting teak or getting a sal forest intact is great. It is good, but remember that there are species, other species, Malotus and Grevillea and so many beautiful shrubs that need to come along with sal and teak, which we don't talk about. Forest department does not have them, and it's great that you are doing something like this for rewilding, because if the native species are brought back through communities and being sold through to forest department, because forest department could not be concerned. They want survival rates, and eucalyptus and acacia gives them survival rates. That's it.
I think there's a, yeah, please, Aruna. Yeah.
To add on that, I think one of the things we did explore was, the value chain development. We had talked the main marketing language, value chain development of lantana wood, and making products out of lantana, and one way of perhaps curbing or finding an alternate use, also creating some livelihoods in the process. But this thing about, I was shocked when I had gone on a recent visit to a mangroves replanted area. They all talking about a weed that is infecting the mangroves, which is supposed to be originating from New Zealand. And I was like, and they just trying to figure out, how to deal with it, and how did it even reach there. So I don't know whether some bird flew from New Zealand and dropped it in our mangroves area or whatever it is. But I'm just saying, these, you just have no idea what comes from where, and we don't have the local ecosystems evolved yet to handle those.
Yeah, yeah. Good. I read recently the fascinating story of how coffee came to India. That's go. You should go read about how coffee was brought to India. But yeah, I think that answered the question. Ameya, on this side, on the left. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I'm Abhisheka. I do belong to the community of sexy ecologists. But more than that, my parents come from the Western Ghats of Karnataka, so I have a special interest in the landscape. I have two questions. My first question is to Aruna. You did talk about community-led conservation, and which is something I deeply believe in. But the landscape that I come from, I do see that whatever little patches of sacred groves that are left, it's because of this fear of chowdi that they have. I mean, this is something I see in my parents' generation, but what the fear that I have is with the youth, like as they the nowadays the youth in that landscape don't really follow a lot of rituals. So in the place that you work in, what is it that you notice with the youth? Are these traditional knowledge being passed on? Are they revered, or what do you see there?
Thank you. I think that people who are born in the Western Ghats, they kind of come out as ready-made PhDs in ecology. So they kind of learn it in the lap of nature. But I do think that the communities, at least the ones we work with, and they are pretty embedded in that philosophy. We've tried to do our bit in terms of trying to get the local schools and colleges as part of all the environmental volunteering activities on a regular basis. So they do participate in a lot of these. But I think somewhere, like I mentioned earlier, the religious connotation somewhere needs to be replaced with the kind of modern, sexy ecologist language. And then how do we then, project that so that policies can fall into place? In the modern democratic world, that's our only, what do you say, the bulwark against the degradation that's happening, right? And so, how do we get that kind of language to replace, maybe absorb what was done as tradition, and then give it the kind of modern scientific lingo, and get that passed as policies and protection for the communities and for, all creatures, great and small, in that area.
Thanks, that's helpful. I have a question from Pranay. How well is Central Western Ghats studied in terms of geology? Are there any open resource publications that one can refer to?
Quite a bit, actually. I mean, but like I say, it's never enough because there's so many more questions. I think I would recommend you know the Mangalore University has a very good geology department. The department in Trivandrum University is very good. Pune University has done a lot of very good work. So these would be my go-to, and also CES, Center for Ecological Studies here in IISc. They have a pretty strong team on geology. So I would recommend look at their papers. They are kind of open access. ResearchGate, thanks to them, it's all available.
My name is Ameya. My question is really, there's a lot of things that we need to change on a big scale, policy, government, and all of that. But what can someone like me do if I want to work towards, I don't know, advocacy, talk to people, make Instagram reels? I legitimately want to know what I can do. How can regular people participate, even if we're city dwellers and we remain city dwellers? but how can we participate in
I'll
helping
pull your
to do
list
this
of
work?
things. Aruna is prepared for this. She's got a whole list of
Superb.
things. Yeah. She's got a sheet for it. Yeah, please read it. This is what it is.
Superb. I will come and photograph that after the session.
Maybe you can sneak peek a one or two of what is written there. In it. Yeah, top three.
Top
That's a good
three,
one.
right.
It's very difficult.
Yes. Would you like to own a bee box and adopt bees? We
That's
have a
a
scheme for
great
you.
idea.
We've
Yeah.
got the sign up outside,
Yes.
right next to the stall. Please do sign up for it. Yeah.
And see, one of the things that we like to do as part of the work there is reduce pressure on forests.
Yes.
And a lot of communities do depend on many things for on the forests. One of it is firewood. And so one of the things we have been doing is, as we keep getting trickles of money in, we look at fuel efficient dryers to install there, because a lot of the wild fruit, those upege and your Garcinia species, which have a high medicinal value, all of these are collected by the forest dwellers, and then they use firewood to actually dry them. Because and so we have been replacing these traditional methods of drying with fuel efficient dryers, which reduce pressure on forest firewood by 83%, and that's a research that backs this kind of a claim. So, sponsor a dryer. So, and of course, the community-owned nurseries where we plant indigenous. So that helps. The scheme we have for owning or adopting bees and owning a bee box is basically your Western Ghats, our communities become your hosts. So your bee box gets hosted in their backyard or in the bordering forest areas, and they grow on your behalf for the off season, when bees are not able to forage or go into the forest areas. They grow a set of indigenous flora and fauna, plants and flowers and things like that, which we know these bees like, and then we grow them around in their homesteads. So maybe supporting that activity. It's also beautiful to just go see them. The women are all excited about all the different kind of flowers and things like that grow there. So that's, I guess, my top two. And of course, the reforestation, plant a tree. We don't have a scheme yet because we look at 10,000, 20,000 hectares at a time, but to plant or replant, because that's the scale you would need for an Ingala project. But yes, little bits of water add up to the mighty sea. So,
Indeed. Thank you.
Great. I think we've got one here, Sushant, right here. And we'll probably have one more question. Do we have another one? Yes, on this right. Okay, perfect. There's one here. Perfect. All right. Two more. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Payal from Kobo Fermentary, and I'm super happy today to see so much spotlight being shone on microbes and the role that they play with this. And what I'd like to know a little bit more about today is the role that, and we know that trees have this internal internet system, which is mycelium essentially, and how is there anybody doing work in the Western Ghats in this space, or like what's going on with the mycelium?
Wood Wide Web.
Sorry?
The Wood Wide Web, as it's called.
Exactly,
Yeah. Well, for one, Mycelium Ecology has just started work on it, but we don't. I don't think we have remotely even initiated this work. One of the core programs for us is to be able to enable research. But maybe Pranay or Aruna, in your expertise, any mycologists?
Well, there's an Indian Mycological Society, which is very good, quite vibrant. I'm not entirely sure whether there's something specific to the Western Ghats, but I'm sure there are researchers who are working on it. I mean, I know two people who work out of Kochi, and they're very, very good. I'm not certain whether they're looking at it from the connectivity of, or the connections, the tenuous connections between different species. Yeah, but I think this is a huge area of work. It was unfashionable till about 10 years ago to even talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's only good that it's gaining currency now. So.
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay. We'll probably finish this side and then finally come to this gentleman. Yeah. Hit the Sushant on this left. Yeah. Right. Yeah. This side.
Hi, a question little bit related to what was asked behind. I feel that all these discussions are great and mind-blowing, but we're a little bit preaching to the converted, right? Everybody who's here has some interest in the topic. So what is being done to raise interest in the little people? Because they are the future and all that, but they're the ones who will have to carry this forward and who will probably hopefully make this conservation preservation effort go where it needs to go. So what are the efforts being done to go to especially city dwellers children? The parents are far removed from the problems and the children therefore have really no idea. What's being done to get them interested, to kind of nurture their curiosity, to help them understand what the problems are without being panic makers? Just they have curiosity, they want to understand, they're new to this world, they want to make it better.
You have any examples on what your world is doing? I mean, I'm happy to talk about why we built Mycelium in the first place. This is the same question I'd asked when we were initially thinking about it. And Nishant, Abhishek, and I also agreed that there's a lot we could do. In fact, the word we say is we didn't inherit this planet from our ancestors, we borrowed it from our children. And I think we owe it to them to at least keep it in a saner way when we hand it over to them. There's a lot of work we are initially thinking about. We are happy to welcome you to contribute. We are working with schools to build safe spaces for them to understand this in the right way, understand nature. I have 3 kids and all of them are afraid of spiders. And I was until 7 months ago when when I joined Mycelium Ecology, that's when I truly understood the importance of it and the beautiful thing of it. I think one big thing we are focusing on is making it accessible so you're able to understand the difference between good or bad. We brought up in a culture where everything is bad. If that insect looks scary, don't go near it. But there could be something beautiful there. So we're trying to make it accessible. That's one of the big mediums we've done. We're partnering with cartoonists to bring some comic books, which brings characters like Purple Frog into light and the importance of it. All of these are work in progress. You are more than happy to help us contribute. And I think it has to be together as community, not one person. But maybe from your experiences, I know you said Ekalavya, you gave me that as a reference when I had asked you the same question, what can we do? But anything else you see as good examples?
I think, like I said, we are going to leave behind a planet which is much worse off, for our children. And we are not even arming them with the tools on how they should fight the crises that they're going to face, whether it's climate change, whether it's contamination, whatever. And we're not even helping them to stay curious because I don't think we encourage critical thinking enough in our schools, at home. We are happy to give a gadget to a child and say, stop hassling me, right? So that's kind of the attitude in most homes. I could say that with some certainty. How do we change this? The paradigm needs a huge shift first from us as older people. I think we have to recognize this. I just want to go back to that question the lady asked there, that what is it that I can do to contribute? I think this is one of those things. The other thing, let me just backtrack. I'm sorry, I'm going to digress a bit. Is that, taking the cue from Lantana, let's stop planting Dieffenbachias and Monsteras and lantanas in our homes. Why can't we have native trees and plants? Why don't we make it necessary that trees that are going to be planted in Bangalore city or wherever are going to be only native? We're going to have at least 40% flowering plants, and of those 40% plants, 20 of those or 50% of those are going to be night flowering, because a lot of your moths are going to get extinct because they they move in at night and they're looking for white flowers and they don't find white flowers, right? So what do you do? So those are the kind of things that we have to plan as ecologists, right? We have to think that, what is missing just now for all the creatures, right? The other thing is open burning. I mean, I come from the city of Delhi, where open burning is like every citizen's right. So you've got these stacks, these plumes coming out from just about every household. Everybody's burning litter. Despite there being a ban, there's, all those kind of things are a complete no-no. Composting happens, but it is not enough. How are we going to talk about carbon burial? I mean, things. I'm going to digress a bit. But let me just talk to you about something which is really close to my heart. India's most produced product is a thing called BD. Cigarettes. Indian cigarillos, hand-rolled cigarillos, right? Now we make about 1 trillion BDs in a year. That's more than the number of pins, staples, safety pins that we make, right? There's no product that is produced in that number. 1 trillion BDs. And we know that it is designed to kill. It is the single largest cause of death among adult males in India. Preventable cause of death, okay? But to make a BD, you need to go to a forest in central India. You need to take that leaf out at the height of summer. The forest has no other tree that has leaf on it. Tendu is the only tree that has leaf, right? After you extract all the leaf from the Tendu tree, you burn it up. You burn the forest floor. Now, to make a BD, a product that kills you or kills most poor people, you use tribal communities to go into the forest to extract a leaf, which is perhaps the only source of shade for animals at the time, and then you burn the forest, right? How perverse can it be, right? So this kind of perversity should also be examined at the larger scale. We're talking of India's forests not as carbon sinks, but they're carbon sources, because you are readily burning them, right? And where is the rewilding happening? Not at all. There are only 30 or 40 good examples of rewilding in this country, right? And there's so much to do. So I think let's start, even if you have a small balcony, make sure that you don't have trees that are exotics. They're not going to help you. They're nice because they're low maintenance. This is exactly the logic that the forest department uses, because the forest department does not want eucalyptus or an acacia to get grazed by a cow or even a ruminant from the forest, right? Let's avoid Brazilian and African exotics that are there. Dracaenas, I mean, I find that ridiculous. Yeah, you have Dracaena plants which are thought to be sacred. How are they sacred? How is it sacred in China? It's a plant found in Brazil. How is it sacred in China? So it just irritates me that you have the adoption or the assimilation of exotic things into culture, religion, tradition for the sake of it. I mean, BD is not native to India. It got discovered or invented the same time as the cigarette, because it was a response to the Swadeshi movement. So anybody who says, my Bab Dada or my great grandfather used to smoke a bidi, that's an absolute lie, because there's no tobacco in India. Tobacco came from America to Europe via Columbus, and Columbus 200 years later from the Portuguese and the British came to India. So I think ask those questions. How do we know that that critical thinking element is clearly missing? And when we it's a very political argument that this is an easy way to to justify something that is perverse. I mean, I use this word very, very carefully, but I think it's the only apt word which says it's perverse. Most of the things that you see around you are perverse. We need to reverse those.
Great. Okay. And we've got probably the final question here.
Rohit has a question.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for it. Great.
Hi, I'm Rohit. Thank you for this enlightening conversation. I have a comment and a question. So it's great to see Pranay talk about or lay emphasis on rocks, because I feel even in the conservation world, a lot of emphasis obviously on flora and fauna, but we don't talk too much about geology and rocks, and that gets overlooked. And the Indian subcontinent has one of the most amazing geological histories. I think more people need to know about it, and we need to sort of lay emphasis or focus on how these rocks are getting extinct because of mining. And like he mentioned, we use all these fancy tiles in our homes, and it may get extinct from the natural landscape. But then I have a question specifically on Western Ghats. I think the government came out with two reports, committees. One was the Gadgil committee, and about designating the Western Ghats as an ecologically sensitive zone. And so Gadgil committee recommended, I think, 100% of the Ghats to be ecologically sensitive zone. But then from what I've read, I don't know if it's true. Like, is it true that the local communities sort of oppose designation of the entire landscape as ecologically sensitive? And then they came out with the Kasturi Rangan committee, which said only 30% should be a sensitive zone. And so what is the sort of way forward on that, of conserving the whole thing as a sensitive zone, or 30%? And is there a resistance from the local communities itself? And so how do we balance that?
Very good question. Yes, I think I'm aware of the Gadgil and the Kasturi Rangan reports. There was a section of communities that protested against the entire zone being converted into an eco zone, because it comes then with the restrictions, and there are communities that live off or within forest areas, and so their concerns were not adequately addressed. So sometimes what happens is that this blanket kind of approach to things do create more of a mess than actually solving a problem. Um, Also, when we work there, we were part of that understanding to gain with the communities to document what their challenges are or would be if everything would be converted into an ecozone. So, and how do you address that? So there needs to be a kind of a roadmap laid out very clearly as to what happens in terms of alternate livelihoods, what happens in terms of other the ecosystem services that are provisioned through for these communities living around those areas. How is that going to be addressed or fulfilled by the government? Um, I think the human animal conflict, the encroachment into each other's spaces, these are like very extremely complicated and highly, what do you say, localized issues. So perhaps a few stakeholder consultations, public hearings, etc., would help to evolve a kind of consensus around it. I know that the communities initially protested the Aganashini River, Aganashini Forest to be declared as the LTM reserve. But then subsequently, they themselves became the biggest protectors. So, you know, the process of consultation is perhaps needed, and what could be missing.
Anything you want to add to that, Pranay? You're
I
good.
think that's
Okay. All right. Any final questions? I think we are on time. We had it till 1 o'clock. Obviously, Pranay and Aruna will be sticking around for some more time, and you can sneak through the list of impactful projects Aruna is working on. But with this, we will come to an end to this talk series. At the beginning, when we were putting this together, we weren't sure what the agenda would be. But all I knew is we met as soon as we initiated Mycelium ecology. The first two people we spoke to was Pranay and Aruna. So we were very clear we wanted to get them here. And we said, we'll get them here and then we'll make a story out of it. Let's see what we can get them to talk. But I think over the last 3 to 4 weeks of discussing and talking, It's almost been a revelation. And as a new day comes in, we're like, oh, we should be talking about this. Oh, we should be talking about it. But it's all come together. So I want to take a moment to thank Pranay and Aruna for joining us. Pranay for flying in all the way from Delhi. If you've ever, thank you. And I had dinner with Pranay yesterday. And the first thing, we left the hotel room, the hotel lobby. And then he pauses and he's like, hold on, you're stepping into a Jurassic period tile. Let's look at it. And I'm like, wow, now I know why Pranay is so good at it. He explained, what was it? There was a yellow stone.
Yeah, it's a Arbor limestone. That's one of the stones that is getting extinct because it's a beautiful yellow sandstone, and it's got amazing marine life in it. So if you look at it very closely, you would see cross sections of bivalves and gastropods, and it's entirely shallow marine sandstone. It's very, very pretty.
I would have never imagined. I've walked over it 100 times and I would have never imagined it. But this is the beauty of building Mycelium. So thank you, Pranay and Aruna. I'd like to thank NSR Cell and IIMB for supporting us initially. The initial event was supposed to be at IIMB. We had this whole walk of the ecological habitat of it. But it's coming. This is a community which will come back together again and again, and we'll do it. BIC for providing such a wonderful space, for giving us the foyer for the art gallery. You, the audience members, could have slept through this beautiful cold Bangalore weather, but you were all here, some of you early on, to support us. So we really thank you, and we hope to see you again and again. And then finally, to the core team at Mycelium, we pulled it off. And I think this is the beginning of what we believe is going to be for the future. So I really want to thank everybody. And please stick around, check out all the flora, fauna. And my hope is in about 5 to 10 years, we say flora, fauna, and fungi. That's the idea. We've only said flora and fauna, but our mission is to see if we can do it. But thank you. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.